On Point is brought to you by Crow Jamaica.
Welcome everybody to On Point for one more week. I'm your host Patria K.
And I'm Dennis John.
And we've got a lot to talk about. Let's recap the week. Big things for you this week, Dennis.
The biggest thing for me is the start of impeachment process, or Nancy Pelosi announcing that they're going to start the impeachment process for Donald Trump. And over 160 Democrats in the House now support it.
I don't know whether or not that's going to go far. I mean, they've been inching towards him since the actual election happened. It's been how many years now, and he's still in there and batting
but
strong.
The difference now is that he's on camera admitting that he actually did have some breach in terms of his talking to the Ukrainian president about investigating his political rival.
Well, we watch that and see how it plays out. The biggest thing for me certainly was what happened in our transport sector right here at home in Jamaica. One taxi driver dead, one JUTC bus driver dead. The system virtually crippled for an entire day. There's this issue of violence that we have. There's an issue of the inability to solve disputes. I mean, talk it out, don't fight it out, whatever happened to that. It all escalated because people had a dispute on the road about passengers.
But, I wasn't surprised when I heard it. I wasn't surprised about it. I've commented in the past that something like this is going to happen. We have very indisciplined behavior on the roads. And I think at some point in time, the road rage was going to converge with the violence that we have in the society. The problem that we have is that we've just let the indiscipline gone too far. Indiscipline, violence now is a way of life. The authorities have just ignored the thing for way too long.
Commendations, I think, have to be given to the folks at PSTEB who stepped in the gap as best they could on the morning of the strike of the JUTC bus drivers. They could have been seen on the road with their police buses, recognizing the vulnerability of our students who would have been at the bus stop waiting to go to school and picking them up and giving them a free ride to their schools. And I think we give them a beat up when they deserve it, but the commendations must also go to them as well.
As I've always said, I think that Kevin Blake was going to do a good job. I mean, maybe it's a good thing that we have him there now rather than the person who was there before. But Blake, someone I know very well for a long time, and I've always thought that he was going to do a good job at PSTEB.
Well, I absolutely think they did so on the morning of that strike. Any other matters at home that stood out for you this week?
Well, for me as a Jamaica College old boy, I mean, former Minister Will Reid, his comments and the news that was carried that he was trying to get back his job at Jamaica
Standing
College.
his ground that he's not resigning.
I think the problem that we have with that sort of thing, I see it as a tactical decision on his part, but I've always lamented the fact that our labor laws need reforming, and that was a part of one of the things that should have been done under the IMF agreement, that we have failed. Both administrations have failed to deal with it, to reform the labor market, I think because of politics.
Well, old boys are very involved in what happens to their school. I know you love your Jamaica College, and you will have a say in what happens next. And it's going to be a battle in the courts.
The WhatsApp groups are very active.
Yes. Well, so much for what happened in the week. Let's talk about what's happening in the show. We're taking a look at climate change, more specifically climate crisis. Is that where we are? How is Jamaica being affected by the change in climate? And is it unsalvageable? Are we at the tipping point? We're talking about it on Point.
We'll look into that a bit more later. But first, let's take a look back at some of the top business stories of the week.
At number 5, the world's oldest travel company, Thomas Cook, collapsed last weekend, leaving hundreds of thousands of holiday makers stranded around the globe, including some in Jamaica. The company folded under a pile of debt after trying unsuccessfully to secure a rescue package from its lenders. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom's Civil Aviation Authority said Thomas Cook had now ceased trading, and the regulator and government would work together to bring the more than 150,000 British customers home over the next 2 weeks. And at number 4, Jamaica's tourism ministry was left reeling from the possible fallout locally from the Thomas Cook collapse. Tourism Minister Ed Bartlett said Jamaica is likely to lose about 8,000 visitors and $10 million in revenue from the travel company's closure. At number 3, the latest figures from the Statistical Institute of Jamaica Statin show that Jamaica's import bill rose for the January to June 2019 period. Jamaica spent almost $3.3 billion in imports, an increase of 13.3% when compared to what was spent during the similar period in 2018. Your number 2 story this week is the chaos that ensued in the corporate area on Tuesday following strike action by Jamaica Urban Transit Company JUTC bus drivers. The drivers walked off the job after a colleague was murdered. This left thousands of passengers stranded. The police had to chip in to get some commuters to their destination. At number 1 this week, the government tabled the supplementary estimates of expenditure in Parliament on Tuesday, proposing to spend an additional $50.15 billion for the current fiscal year. This will increase the $803.24 billion budget approved in March this year to $853.39 billion. On the capital side, $5 billion in additional allocation has been made under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation for spending on roadwork under the Major Infrastructure Development Program.
When we come back, the climate crisis and Jamaica's fight to survive after the break. Welcome back to On Point. Now, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, spoke earlier this week at the United Nations General Assembly about the climate crisis. He spoke about how it's affecting small island developing states like Jamaica. Take a listen to some of what he said.
Prime Minister Holness of Jamaica. Clearly, the islands are on the forefront of the feelings of the effects of climate change. Your voice needs to be heard in this room. The floor is yours.
Colleagues, friends, the global financing system requires immediate transformation to support action to tackle climate change. For the past year, Jamaica has been co-leading efforts to make this happen. The transformation must be science-based, technically appropriate, transparent, and supported by accurate and inclusive tracking methodologies. Here are some of the things that we have been looking at and advocating. The Paris Agreement, Capital Transition Agreement, risk scenario analysis tools already applied by 600 financial institutions worldwide could be adopted by private institutions and private investors to align their portfolios with the Paris Agreement. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures should be used to better inform investors on climate-related risks. Jamaica's effort to achieve fiscal discipline have not been without sacrifice. It is essential, therefore, that we have access to innovative, low-cost, and flexible financing windows to protect our hard-earned economic stability. We therefore welcome the commitment by multilateral development banks to further mobilize $40 billion of climate change investments from private sector investors annually by 2025. This includes important provision of technical assistance, use of guarantees, and other de-risking instruments. We also welcome their announcement of doubling adaptation financing to US $18 billion annually by 2025. I close by reiterating the concern of developing countries that the delivery mechanisms for climate finance are still fragmented and slow. The bottlenecks and gaps in the project investment value chain prevent climate finance from getting to where it is most needed. We are encouraged, however, by new and exciting developments, such as the Closing the Investment Gap Initiative and the Climate Investment Platform, which hold great promise and will expand to meet the investment and technical assistance needs of more developing countries. Colleagues, there is no silver bullet for climate finance challenges. However, by supporting and promoting existing and new initiatives, we will be taking action that the younger generation is demanding. Remember, they are watching.
All right, and joining us now to talk about the climate crisis and what Jamaica is doing to adapt to the changing times, we have none other than Senator Pernell Charles, who is the Minister without Portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and Indy McClymont Lafayette, Communication Specialist for the Adaptation Program and Financing Mechanism for the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to On Point.
Welcome to the show, folks. Well, let's get right into the conversation because I want to start out with this climate crisis label. Yes. Would you describe it as such?
What we do know is that we have significant challenges. The word crisis itself is a word which you have to be careful because it really tugs on you emotionally and may cause persons to have the wrong response and getting scared instead of being prepared, though they should be scared. Mm-hmm. We, like many other small island developing states, are at incredible risk. We are vulnerable because of our geographical location. We are vulnerable because of our size and many other characteristics which cause us to have no other choice but to recognize the reality of the intense systems that are impacting us and to use every means possible to get all on board in preparing proactively to be able to not just respond, but to withstand the impacts. You've seen the unfortunate results of climate change and the impact across the Caribbean region.
But let me ask though, Indy. I mean, I totally agree with what the minister said, but based on what we're seeing globally and the new studies that have come out, aren't we in a crisis really? I mean, they say we just have a few more years before this thing is irreversible.
I would say what jumps out for me is the whole issue of urgency and the need for urgent action, especially for small island developing states like us. Because the reality is, unless the global community gets to certain targets, we are going to continue to feel the Dorians and the Marias that we have been having and not been able to withstand. So that is where the crisis comes in for us. We have to be very vocal internationally in asking for the 1.5 target to be met if we want to survive as small islands. So I would say, as small islands, yes, it is a crisis of survival.
And that's where our governments have a challenge. The urgency is required not only on our part in saying, look, we're being affected, but the urgency must be recognized by the bigger nation states, the global village, that we are the ones that we're seeing Hellshire disappear. We are the ones that are having the coral reefs disappear. We are the ones that are getting hit by the Marias and the Dorians. Yes. Are they seeing it as a matter of urgency?
No, I believe so. I think that you have several partners globally who recognize the importance. And our Prime Minister, as you rightly said, is right now at the UN General Assembly as one of the leaders in this discussion around climate financing, together with France and Qatar. We are representing the small island developing states. The response has been so far, I think, positive, but there's so much more that is needed. So there are some very specific targets and specific requests that are being submitted and made in relation to seeking more support, and not just financial support, because we are going to have to require our global partners to change their own behavior. We are the most affected, but perhaps the ones who contribute the least.
What do they do that harms us?
A lot of it goes down, I think, to industrialization and just practices which cause the greenhouse gases and other things which harm. And the world is connected. It's one big interconnected world. And so if you affect the planet to the west, those to the east will feel it.
So how then do you look at capitalist world with the billions of people and say, hey, my 3 million's over here and you're affecting me?
I mean, as you said, what do they do that harm us, right? Really and truly, if the US, China, India, which are the main emitters, change quite a few things in terms of energy consumption. Yes. That is a big thing, oil and phasing out oil, going more to green energy.
And renewables.
Right, those are some of the things that are priority, because the reality is small islands, the Caribbean, we only contribute 0.8% to global emissions. So if everybody did everything that we're supposed to mitigate and adapt, it's only 0.8%.
It's starting though, we have to recognize that. It's starting, because you ask what the response is. And I can tell you, I'm just coming from China 1 month ago. I was there. There is a lot of work to be done. But we must recognize that the improvements in terms of the introduction of renewable energy technology and targets that have been set for us to improve the energy efficiency, those are global targets.
But you have folks who are going to listen to us talk and say, we can talk about this academically all we want, but when you've got the head of perhaps one of the largest developing countries out there questioning whether or not climate change is real, what real action can you get out of the United States if the president doesn't even believe that this is a real thing?
There are various ways to interpret your understanding of a particular definition. Regardless of that, I always examine the practical realities. And I think that the United States, despite the varying understandings and conclusions that have been drawn, have to face the fact that there must be better use of energy. There is obvious impacts, whether you want to call it climate change or not. There are obvious impacts and consequences that arise from our actions. And like everyone else, we are going to either have to do it or be compelled.
But Minister, they're not doing it. And therefore the question in there is that based on the time, and I'll get down to the time again, the time that they say is irreversible, and the attitudes that are out there, do we have enough time to save the earth? That's fundamentally what it comes down to,
Well, according to some of the scientific reports coming out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there's what's called a tipping point. Right. And if I'm correct, I think it's over 20 years span, but that gap they're saying is closing.
But they said it's another 10 or 12 years to go.
Right, are melting more quickly. But I think, so yes, the time window is narrowing if we don't really get serious now. And the case of the US is a special one, because what we have to note is that the US has not gotten out of the Paris Agreement yet. Despite what Trump says, the way Obama
They're still
did
signatories.
they could not come out so easily. So it's still effective until the end of his term. What he has done is cut funding for some climate action.
Which makes a difference.
Yes, it does, because for the international target, one of the key targets they wanted to reach for 2020 was 100 billion, so that they could split that to
100 billion
Yes.
dollars?
Yes.
Yes.
Split that to help cover both mitigation measures internationally as well as adaptation, which is where we as small islands would get more access to funds to adjust. So now they haven't met that 100 billion target. So I get, and so that does raise the question.
So what's the implication of not meeting that $100 billion target? That is really
It's two things. They're behind on the target, and in terms of the global emission, in Paris, when the agreement was signed, they were saying working towards 3% reduction.
Mm-hmm.
The Caribbean islands want 1.5. The reality, the scientist says, is that we're closer to 4. So the priority is still
therefore,
behind.
what is the implication? So for the man on the street, when you're talking to him, what is going to happen to him?
If you don't take care of your woman, she'll leave you.
Yes.
If you don't take care of the planet, it will leave us. The planet is a living creature.
And the small
it's all
islands,
interconnected.
the small
and we as
islands
humans will be removed. If
we
don't
will
take care
go
of it.
first.
It's simple.
We will go first.
It only takes a trip to Hellshire for you to
Of
feel in a real way.
Have you look back on your pictures from 20 years ago.
Forget the pictures.
And you see, but
your
you
own
have to
eyes.
juxtapose it.
If in 6 months you go there and you can visit, there is no sand at Hellshire anymore.
But
There
a lot
is no
of
sand.
that is also for us to do. So I understand the necessity for our partners who are perhaps the main contributors to be compelled to help in our building up of resilience, because that is what is required. We don't want to be responding. We need to build up and adapt and create the capacity to be able to withstand the impact. Now, but we have a lot more to do here as well.
There's a positive story about some fishermen on somewhere along the coast who actually rebuilt the coral reefs.
Oh, that's
yes, we have a number of those. We have a number of those across the country, and
White River. A part of our project, we provided funding for White River Fishermen's Association, and they planted 1,000 pieces of coral, baby corals, and they are reforesting the reef. It's a fantastic project, but that's
dropping the bucket.
Yes.
But it's important. I mean, I don't want, because a lot of the persons I speak to take the stance of, well, what I'm going to do won't make a difference. It will. And we must create that narrative and push that sentiment. Every nickel, every drop in that bucket will count. Okay? But it still means that we have to have massive policies and we have to have a very clear understanding as to where we're going to go with the planet.
I want to just put something on the table. I was a part of the team that went to the Conference of the Parties last year. And what I know the Climate Change Division has been doing, it's twofold. It's encouraging us to do all that we can to adapt, because internationally they ask everybody to do that. But there's one issue that I know that they are pushing for, which is called loss and damage. And it is where countries like the Bahamas, who you put in everything and try to adapt, but then there's only so much preparation you can do. A Dorian comes and wipes you out. Putting in some funding there for those countries to help them come back, build back.
Who would contribute to that, who will?
Everybody, mostly the developed countries.
But even nationally, we're trying to do that now. Because part of our discussions here are to ensure that we have funds that are earmarked to be able to respond to that kind of disaster.
People have been having issue with our contributions to the CRIF fund, saying we keep pouring this money in the fund, but the kind of devastation that's required for you to draw down on those funds, we haven't been able to. So flooding has cost us a lot. Storms have cost us a lot. Tropical depressions have cost us a lot. But the trigger to draw down on those funds, you need a Dorian to happen. And so it's a wasted expense for Jamaica. What do you say to that?
But I'm saying, who knows when we'll get a Dorian, so you cannot not be a part of something like that. But I also know it's a what?
A waste of money for us to be doing that. Because
I think they are looking at adjusting the parameters.
We could be safe. Yeah, well, they have to.
Yeah, I think they are looking at that. The 1.5 report, which Professor Michael Taylor did, a lot of research is coming out, so we have to be guided by the science. So I think CRIF is looking at how they can rework.
But let me ask you though, Indy. In order for us to understand and for the viewers to understand the impact of this thing, give me a timeline and unfold. Tell me how things unfold. We know about movies like The Day After.
You want to hear doom and gloom by when? When are we all gone?
Because
when is it over?
When should I kiss my mother?
This is the urgency we're talking about, and we have to put it in cold reality for people.
I don't know that you can give any specific timelines, but
one thing that we can take into consideration, it's what's called climate departure, and they're still doing research on this. But a study came out a few years ago which indicated that Kingston will be one of the first cities in the Caribbean to experience climate departure, which means that each year we get successively hotter. So every year, if the temperature was 10 degrees, next year it will be 11, and it keeps climbing.
Yeah.
And after a certain point, it's not gonna go back to normal. So sometimes we say, oh, no. So it ties in with the tipping point that maybe after 10, 12 years, this is the new reality.
We keep pointing fingers at first world, at developed nation states, and saying you do and it affects us. But we can't completely absolve ourselves of the responsibility that we play, of the part that we have played in the degradation of climate.
Yes.
What's the role that we have played, and what behavior do we need to change to make things better for ourselves?
It's one planet, yeah? And, it doesn't take too much for you to even look on how much garbage, Dennis, you did it, how much garbage we have in the wrong places in our country. We have to have more than just enforcement, more than just legislation. There has to come a point where we all appreciate the requirement to change our behavior, or else.
Indeed. As much as we sometimes cross Jamaica, I'll say that we have been doing a lot to position ourselves to adapt. Right now, we are the only Caribbean country that has 4 projects under the pilot program for climate resilience. And what they are doing is targeting both policy and vulnerable sectors to help us to build resilience. So for example, the agricultural sector, working with farmers to get them to adopt more climate resilient practices. So if you always plant breadfruit or banana, when hurricane they come and everything gone, put in pineapple, sweet potato,
but you want pineapple every day, but
no.
you want the breadfruit.
But be open to experimenting to crops that are more resilient. If we have St. Elizabeth, the drought, the farmers dying, but how do they adapt? What are some of the things they can plant that don't need as much water? The science. So you is doing some research with the farmers to help them to transition.
Hold the thoughts. I want to hear about those 3 other pillars, and then after that I'm going to tackle you from the policy perspective, because you have a responsibility for water and we have a water crisis. We'll talk about it after the break. Welcome back to On Point, viewers. We're talking extreme climate change right here on the show. We have Senator Pernell Charles and also Indy McClymont. And just before the break, you were mentioning the adaptation pilot program that you are working on. There are 4 pillars. One is taking a look at the re-education of the farmers and getting their own crops a little bit more hearty, having them think about mitigation measures and adaptation. What else is happening there?
So the PPCR projects, one looks at climate data collection that is run from the Planning Institute to ensure that we can be predicting what's coming, updating our equipment. we're looking at the policy level, working on the climate change policy and mainstreaming climate change throughout government and with partners. My project in particular has been working with providing financing for climate adaptation at the community and ground level. So we have given over 115 grants, and the JN, working in partnership with JN, we are offering climate smart loans for individuals and companies to adapt to climate change.
With what? When I get, what do I need money to do in my company or in my
Look at the
home?
drought we're having now. I mean, water security. Go to your house, get a black tank, so you know that when NWC not cutting it, you at least have 2 weeks of water or whatever time frame. So something as simple as that, you can access the 5 million to do something.
But that water
like
is not water you can drink though. It's water you can use like in your lawn.
Well, part of what technically you can get purification pumps and so on to put everything in so that it's fine to drink.
But Minister, talk about that. What are some of the policy things we're pushing now? Because you spoke about the garbage thing, right? But we still have a piece of legislation in the Parliament that's supposed to up the fines for people who dispose of garbage illegally for years now, right? We don't see any tax incentives, for example, coming on. What are some of the things that the government is thinking of? Because I know it's a big concern for the government.
Well, I tell you, in general terms, I know that in terms of the specific to climate change, there is a framework that is being developed to ensure that there is the interconnectivity between all of the ministries and agencies, and to highlight the importance of all of these ministries having sustainable development at the forefront of their activities.
See a lot of work from Minister Williams trying to change out the dependence on fossil fuels, etc. Yes,
definitely. So it's energy efficiency, lowering the greenhouse gas emissions, ensuring that we introduce the renewable energy technology, ensuring that we have rainwater harvesting that's coming from climate change, but also in the water sector policy, and just ensuring that all of the aspects of development are aligned. So you'll notice that our, what we call Vision 2030, our national development goals are more than 90% aligned to Action 2030, which is what defines the sustainable development goals for the planet.
And yet, Minister, there's somebody who is hearing the fancy talk and saying, I still can't flush my toilet right now. Yeah. Somebody who is looking out their window and hearing that the legislation has been passed, that apartment buildings can now go higher than they used to be able to go before. And you still can't get water on the ground floor, let alone on the 8th floor of an apartment building. And they think, what are you saying?
And right now, Patricia seen a lot of rainfall and I still can't.
And let me tell you, I sit here having inherited a system which is completely deficient, but I have the responsibility to solve it. And so I know that I take the blows. And I understand the frustration because I live here. We are all in it together. I've had to scoop up close to the wall too. But things are getting better.
How?
We have already started. We're working also with the within the ambit of the whole sustainable development and climate change issues to ensure that we do what is necessary to diversify our system, to put in place the investment in our upgrade of the water transmission systems, to build out better maintenance protocols so that you don't have one part going bad and then you have 8 months delay and 200 people not getting water.
And I hear you, Minister, but there are people who are going to say we are being as capitalist as the first world folks, because if we are going to pass legislation for example, the high rises, the allowing of the increase of the density of the apartment buildings and say put on 4 more floors and not fix the water issue first.
But while we
it's cart
do
before
so,
the horse.
While we do so, because remember, development it's including several elements. One of the most important, the core of it to me is water. Now, while we increase the amount of infrastructure across the corporate area and other places. We are also looking on those regulations and legislation that's going to make it mandatory that you have the necessary storage capacity, that you have the right size pipes, that you're able to provide the water to all of the persons in your complex.
So the onus will be on the developer?
On the developer. We also as government have a lot of work to do. And so you'd have seen, and you'd have heard rather, a number of announcements that are short term, medium term, long term. In the short term, we unfortunately have to rely on the trucking. So we have to procure more trucks to be able to do so, because it doesn't matter how much money you put to it. If you can't get it into a truck, sanitized, and to the person, it doesn't make sense.
But Minister, isn't one of the issues that we have, though, that we come up with all these things, and over the years, it has been a history of Jamaica. You come up with all these laws and regulations, and there's no enforceability. We can't even lock off.
Which is what I said earlier.
Obey the night noise abatement act.
Which is why my stance is you must have the law, because it is important to have a framework for somebody to, even if not for the citizen here, for an investor to be able to project and to put in place in their examination of the country, what is this country about? What are the understandings within which we can execute our function, our business? So it's important. But more important, and I said it earlier, is to make sure that we are implementing the initiatives and we are stimulating our citizens from a very, very early age to become standard bearers. This is your country, and so you must know how to harvest, how to conserve, how to consume, how to protect. But it can't all be on the citizens. It has to be a partnership. It has to be a combination of things, including the upgrades, including the change of attitude, including the management of NWC and other agencies.
And so I still want to stay on the role of the government, because we're talking about cracking old asbestos pipe network across the country, that with all the development we're doing with roadworks, we're doing a disservice to the water network. Are we willing to look at funding models similar to the model we perhaps use to build out highways and do the road network? Are we open? Are our international partners open to refurbishing the water network with that same kind of model?
Well, we should be pleased to know that Prime Minister Holness actually ensured that the new roadwork that's taking place was also coupled with the necessary repair of those pipelines. That is actually one of the reasons why we've had some so much deficiency in terms of water getting to all of the consumers, because we've been doing work on the pipes. But when that phase passes, we're going to see the improvements. So we've at least come to a place where we understand the importance of the unison between road work and pipeline work, so that we reduce the waste and increase the efficiency. Now, to the other part, yes, right now we have evaluated already the cost to truly comprehensively upgrade our system, and it is said to be 3.5 billion US just for our water sector.
Throughout the country?
Throughout the country. I mean, we need 60 million gallons per day for the corporate area, 188 million gallons across the country. And for instance, one water treatment plant, which we're intending to do, which is at the final negotiation stages now for Rio Cobra content, costs 60 million US. To fix the pipelines from 6 miles going up, another 60 million US. So you get an idea of the intensity of the investment that is required. We are examining a number of options to define exactly what is the best approach to find the money, because it all comes down to us requiring a complete, comprehensive change.
Because the longer we take, there is waste. Mark Barnett and his team from the NWC will tell you that so many gallons of the water
I can tell
that we
exactly
actually collect is going to waste.
Of what we produce,
coming to you, Indy.
We have what we call the non-revenue water.
Right.
And of what we produce nationally, they estimate that almost up to 70% is lost In the corporate area, where we have high population density, pardon?
Hasn't it been reduced from 70%?
In the corporate area, due to this project which has been instituted in its 4th year now, partnership with Maya Jamaica, they've been able to reduce the corporate area from 63 now to 36%, a magnificent reduction. And so, you know, we'll see more water being available to the system, but much more is needed. Much more is needed.
And you wanted to say?
Yes, I wanted to make the point of policy, and we spoke about the gap between enforcement and what is there. But critically too, if we're gonna get funds internationally for some of the actions that we want, we do have to ensure that the policies are there and meeting the needs. And so there are quite a few when it comes to climate change that we're in the process of looking at. One of the things that the adaptation program is doing is a national spatial plan, which ensures that Jamaica's planning, it sort of merges with Vision 2030, but in a more detailed way. So looking at, okay, we have so many squatters across the island, and if that population continues to grow, how are we going to deal with that, with climate risk? Plenty of them squat on the river, and therefore when it floods, we hear how much drown. So how are we mapping that? And we're using the technology, we put in some online portals so we can sort of map some of these things, so we see 10, 15 years, where do we need to be, and we backtrack and say, okay, we need money for this because this is where we are heading.
But Minister, that's another problem, you know. The squatting is a serious problem. You can't police the communities, you can't collect garbage in the communities because the squatting community is just not organized.
I'm going to commit to coming back another time to talk to you about it, because we have a squatting policy.
Yeah, but Minister, a part of the problem with the squatting, you know, is that over the years, politicians have encouraged people to squat.
Name one.
So that they can have votes in the areas.
You tell me who is encouraging them.
And you will deal with them.
I'm in charge of it. I will deal with them.
You deal with them.
Tell me who. But the reality is that you're completely correct. Yeah. It causes us to have a dysfunctional system, and it impacts more the generations that grow up and grow into that area. It's connected to security issues, connected to environmental issues, and most importantly, connected to a psyche.
Yeah.
Just how you see yourself. So it's something which, from the perspective of the housing section of my portfolio, we're taking very seriously. I'd have to come back. There's a lot about it in terms of social housing and squatting, and what we're doing now is a national survey, so we can firstly get a full understanding of where we are. You're going to need another half an hour for that.
I still have questions about water. There was the idea at what point floated about making the NWC a privatized entity, and that the level of delivery, of service delivery, the urgency to a commitment to quality might be maintained if the NWC was privatized. Is that still on the table as we look towards the rationalization, and is that in the short order?
It is. I'll say that openly. I am willing to look on any option that's going to allow me as a minister to be able to provide better service for the people of Jamaica.
Does anybody want to buy the NWC?
Let's discuss that. I'll discuss that with the several international partners that are examining it right now. But certainly, we'll have to find a way. We'll find a solution. The other option is not available. The option of just simply leaving it as is untenable. We have a clear mandate, which is to not repeat mistakes. And in doing so, we have to look at a different structure. And that's something which is now actually being designed and finalized in a cabinet submission, which should be before us very soon for us to really examine it in further intricate detail.
Interesting experience from the University Mona campus. We had the past principal on, and he told of digging their own well.
Yes.
Digging their own well and solving a water shortage issue that they had for decades on that campus. Are we looking to those kinds of solutions? Because the catchment facilities right now, even with the rain, most of the major ones, all of the major ones, are under 50% of capacity, even with the rains. And so do we look at things like looking at underground waters, building new catchment facilities? We talk about doing new things. What are those new things?
Well, firstly, there are a number of activities that are being now explored and that have already commenced through the NWC in the rural water. We have rainwater harvesting in schools and other institutions. We have the rehabilitation of several catchment tanks across the country, the rehabilitation and institution of several minor water supplies, particularly in rural areas. We are looking to build out and rehabilitate around 10 or 11 wells in the corporate area, which should give us an additional 10 million gallons per day to meet the demand of the 60, which is required. We're looking at the Rio Cobra content to bring abstract of 15 million gallons daily from there.
How do people live here and the water is on the other end of the island? Have we thought through how that works?
How we developed our countries in an inverse way. So we have a lot of our resources on the north, but we settled on the south. And so we do not have a shortage of water. What we have is a system that is not diversified enough to tap into all of our sources of water. And it's understandable because of the cost. For instance, we hear people talk about desalination all the time. Minister, why not desalination? Why not desalination? The cost. NWC is perhaps the biggest JPS customer. If you were to add desalination to that, in a time and within the context of us having pipes that are leaking 70%, that would mean you have the abstraction of more expensive water, you're losing more expensive water, and the consumer will have a doubled or tripled rate.
I see Indy making notes, which means she has a point that she wants to make.
No, I'm thinking of quite a few of the things when you're looking at the access with the water. And I'm also looking at where a lot of our infrastructure is on the coast. 70% of our developments are on the coast. So in our strategies and our thinking, we have to look at how we develop. You were raising the point about the inverse development. Coastal sea level rise means that our hotels and beaches are at great risk of going. Our airport, we rehabilitated Norman Manley, however, it's still a great risk, and so we have to rethink quite a few things in going forward if we really are serious about adapting.
But isn't it policy issues though? Because you think about airport, no, it is not sensible to put an airport on beside your water, right? The airport must be inland. That's one thing I've learned. But the whole, how we have developed our country is really a lack of policy and enforcement and all that.
Have we reached the tipping point there? And that's the final question
not
to
just
you.
Policy. There is a clear, you can challenge many of the decisions made in the past. Planning and coordination could have been much, much better. And again, the reality is we've inherited a system which is woefully deficient. Right. But that's the past. How are we going to change it? We're responsible for the solutions. And I personally am listening to India and I'm thinking water is the core of climate change issues. And so I know that the adaptation program has a lot of funding. And we need to put some of that funding towards the water sector. And it's something which I've spoken to Una May about as well. Because if we define our way forward by planning, not just for tomorrow, but for 100 years, like the Chinese, then we are going to reap the benefit of better and smarter decisions.
Senator, we're going to hold you to that. You inherited a bad system,
yes,
but we're going to hold you to making bad better.
And it has been improved.
Indeed.
It has been improved. Yes.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you very much.
We take a break, folks. When we come back, so much more on point. Welcome back to On Point, folks. Things have changed a lot for the Earth over the last 100 years, and a lot of that change has been because of our own changing lifestyles. How much has the planet been affected by our doing? Take a look at the numbers.
In the year 1900, the total global emissions of carbon dioxide from burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, agriculture, and other human activities was 1.957 billion tons. By 2018, that figure ballooned to 36.831 billion tons. China was responsible for 27% of global carbon dioxide output in 2018, while the United States of America accounted for 15%. Sea level has risen 4 to 10 inches over the last 100 years, mainly because water expands when heated. The melting of glaciers, which has occurred worldwide over the last century, also contributes to the rise. June 2019 was the hottest June on record for the globe, and Kingston recorded its highest temperature ever when the thermometers registered 39.1 degrees Celsius.
And our On Point team hit the streets and asked, what are you willing to personally give up to fight climate change?
One of the things I try my best to cut back on is, for example, the use of plastic. I kind of like the idea of the government bringing across by not having us, each time you go to the supermarket, you get a set of scandal bag, but instead you bring your own bag. That's a good method. As I said, I like to cut down on electricity. I don't use that much because I don't see the nature going solar. So until then, we have to use gas oil, and for that, you have to cut down on electricity.
Well, I think using less electricity, less energy. Yes, personally, that's what I think I would be willing to give up.
Personally, I would give up using less electricity because that's oil conservation. I recycle, so that's also something that helps with climate change. And in addition to that, the government had imposed a scandal bag. That's a very good move, to be honest. I think that it is effective, as we can plainly see. So we as individuals need to help out the government in reducing climate change.
As it relates to climate change, I don't believe that I do anything that contributes negatively to climate change. People in our community, though, I'm sure, do some things like burning garbage. So what we could do is probably encourage persons more to put their garbage away. Call National Solid Waste Management because they do collect if you give them a call. So that's something that could be done. So awareness, I guess, or education about it.
Deforestation for me. I do a lot of that because I want a better view. So instead of cutting down a limb or so the tree affect, I just take out everything. So I guess I gotta stop and prune. Instead of deforestation, I guess I gotta prune now.
For me, climate change has a lot to do with pollution and things like that. So if we could use a lot more biodegradable products, get some help with the drainage. I mean, look at what's happening behind you. But of course, outside of that, using more biodegradable products, using things that are more eco-friendly. So like our fuel, less emissions, things like that.
I am willing to give up driving to work. Presently, I take the express bus to work. So, that basically I'm using less gas.
In order to minimize my negative effect on the environment, I'll reduce my consumption of water. So basically, rather than use the hose to wash the car, use a bucket.
But then it's what a discussion. Sometimes you have this helpless feeling as a small island developing state. So much of what happens to us happens not because of us. And so you feel a little helpless sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest challenge, I think, facing the globe right now, climate change. But personally, my view is that I don't think that we're going to be able to get away from that tipping point. No, I mean, I'm just being practical. I mean, we're being distracted by Brexit, by what's happening with Russia and their ambitions, by what's happening in the US with politics. All of these distractions are happening at a time when the climate change argument is getting critical.
So I have faith I recall from as young as when I was in primary school, we started to have this conversation about the hole in the ozone layer. And I thought I would have been a melted puddle in the corner somewhere because the hole in the ozone layer was getting bigger. But as a world, we collectively got together and we made the decision that we're going to reverse that crisis at the time. And so the aerosols stopped and the hole in the ozone layer got smaller. I have the kind of faith that people will get to a place.
But it has not changed the situation as is?
Well, that particular crisis at the time has been reversed. I think I'm having faith in humanity that we'll get to a place where we recognize the damage, where the bigger nation states, where the Americas and the Chinas and the Englands of this world and the Indias of this world will recognize the damage that they're causing and do something.
Well, with the political leadership that we have now globally, I'm hoping that it will change, because it really will not impact us significantly, but our children or our grandchildren are really the ones that are going to be impacted.
We have a duty to them.
I mean, we're having category 5 hurricanes regularly now.
And you know what? When you look at the bands of the hurricanes, yes? Some of the strength hurricanes that we've seen passing through the Caribbean, if there were a band 6 and 7, we actually would see that. But I don't think any of the folks, the Saffir-Simpson scale person who put it together, never ever imagined that kind of intensity. One of the things that we have to do, though, is we have to shout loudly. Because out of the goodness of their hearts, these bigger nation states aren't going to change behavior. I mean, you know, when you have that little annoying small dog that barks and barks and barks incessantly until it gets on your nerves, we have to be that little small annoying dog. Oi, hopefully not. Gotta say thanks to the folks who made the show happen, and the conversation has to continue outside of this set. Have to say thanks to the hardworking crew that I see that you don't. Thanks also to you, the viewers, for tuning in every week. I'm Patria K.
And I'm Dennis Strong.
See you next week.
On Point was brought to you by Crow Jamaica.